Today we are going to talk about the monster study. We decided to do this because we wanted to focus more on a case and not just a whole topic in general. The monster study case begins with Wendell Johnson and Mary Tudor. Professor Johnson grew up with a debilitating stutter. He wanted to attend the University of Iowa because they are famous for their research in speech pathology and stuttering. Stuttering is when a person talks with a continued involuntary repetition of sounds, mostly syllables. There are roughly 3 million people around the world that stutter. It occurs mostly in children between the ages of 2 and 5. He said he wanted to be a speech pathologist because he needed one. The university said that physiology was the explanation for stuttering, but Johnson thought differently. He said that stuttering was, for him, became worse when his parents found out that he might have a problem. This caused him to be more self-conscious and became obsessed with it. He thought stuttering was a learned behavior. He thought, therefore, it could be unlearned. He realized an experiment was needed to prove his thesis. He wanted to prove that it was a learned condition response. So in 1938, Johnson recruited Mary Tudor, who was 22, and was a clinical psychological graduate student. Mary Tudor became heavily involved with working with orphans during this study.
The study began in 1938, and it was in Iowa. It was an orphanage called the Iowa Soldiers' Home. And Johnson received permission to use the children in that home for his study. The orphanage provided a large group of children, and no need for parental consent or permission because they didn't have parents, obviously. So they took 22 children from the home, divided them into 2 groups. One was an experimental group and one was a control group. And then they took half the kids in the control group and half the kids in the experimental group were stutterers, and the other half were normal fluent speakers. The experimental group received negative reinforcement, so even if they were asked to read something and they faltered on a word, she would make them stop. Mary would make them stop and repeat what they were saying, and just point out every little error in their speech until they started stammering and stuttering even more than the normal speakers never did before. And then she also got the teachers at the school to follow along and do the same. The same if they were talking, they would have to stop and repeat what they were saying. So the dilemma is this medical science? Is finding out that calling attention to a child's stuttering can decrease the stuttering, or is that helpful? Can that help millions of children who do stutter? Is there value to the study? So, like letting parents know who have kids that stutter that they shouldn't be calling attention to their stuttering because it's only going to make it worse. And then also, was there harm done? And we think there was harm done because there was long-term effects to the kids. And the kids weren't able to they didn't get consent, they didn't get information, they didn't even know they were being studied on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the kids. One of them was 6-year-old Norma Jean Pugh, and she was a fluent speaker before the study, and after the study she could barely speak. 9-year-old Elizabeth Ostert and 12-year-old Philip Speaker were both good students, and their grades all dropped off after the study ended because they couldn't even, they were just too embarrassed to answer questions in class and talk to the teacher. Clarence Pfeiffer was teased relentlessly on the playground for his stuttering. And then there was 15-year-old Hazel Potter, who started, she couldn't even say a sentence without snapping her fingers to get the word out, or when she was writing compositions for class, she would even write a word twice. So what happened was 5 out of 6 of the normal speakers in the experimental group became stutterers.
I also wanted to go more in depth of one of the most famous kids in this study was Mary Kolaski. She was first experimented on January 19th, 1939. She, right off the bat, had a really close bond with Mary Tudor and even wanted her to be her own mother. Tudor began asking Mary if she knew anyone that stuttered, and Mary said her friend Dorothy was a big-time stutterer. Mary started telling a story, and Tudor immediately interrupted when Mary made one simple repetition. Tudor said that if she didn't work on her stuttering, that she'd become as worse as her friend Dorothy, and this obviously scared Mary. Mary's repetitions became more and more frequent after that. This was known as negative therapy and was designed to make Mary more self-conscious of her speaking. By March, Mary's speech had completely deteriorated. She had problems with words beginning with W, S, and R. She regressed during the study to using incomplete sentences, so everything that Mary Tudor asked her, she could not repeat in a real sentence. Also, Mary Tudor was also happy that the teachers were also using negative therapy, so when she wasn't there observing them, they were still constantly being exposed to it. Mary also had trouble reading in class, and her speech interruptions had doubled in the course of 4 months with meeting with Mary Tudor. And Mary Tudor she was allowed until 2006, and actually Mary Kolaski wrote to Mary Tudor and said to her in the letter, "I could have been a scientist, archaeologist, or even president. Instead, I became a pitiful stutter. The kids made fun of me, my grades fell off, I felt stupid, clear into adulthood. I still want to avoid people to this day." So we just want to talk about the aftermath. Obviously, these kids had severe problems all throughout their life with school, social interactions. Tudor said none of the children developed a stutter, but obviously the damage was still there nonetheless. Tudor's thesis was never published. Also, Johnson decided not to publish his work because his colleagues felt that his career would be totally tarnished. Also, Tudor and Johnson never intended to cause harm to the children, and the title of the study might be a little harsh, but in reality it did ruin the chances of these kids having normal lives and trying to do well in life. Furthermore, in 2003, the lawsuit Nixon et al. Versus State of Iowa was filed by 6 children and heirs who said their parents and grandparents' experiences promoted lifelong emotional distress. In 2007, it was settled, and 3 women and 3 estates of 3 deceased people will share a total of $925,000 payment from the state, which really isn't a lot for all the damage that was caused. Also, I wanted to point out that with ethics being involved, this case added a lot of language barriers because most of the kids after the study couldn't look at people directly in the face, would always have to look down. One woman said that her grandfather was part of the case. He said that he was a man of little words, barely engaged in conversation. So obviously the effects are there. Let's go to the questions.
Yep.
Do we have any questions? All right.